Sometimes all that's left of a person is paper. A few deeds, some court records, maybe a final will. In today's Explainer, we're basically becoming historical detectives. Our mission? To piece together a life, a family, and a mystery, using nothing but a colonial paper trail. Our whole investigation kicks off with this one single, kind of startling line from a last will and testament. In 1753, a man named Joseph Seaver wrote this down. I give and bequeath unto the heirs of my son Robert Seaver, deceased, 5 shillings. 5 shillings. I mean, in today's money, it's pretty much nothing. It almost feels like a slap in the face, right? A final, deliberate insult. And that's the big question, isn't it? Was this about some huge family fight? A terrible falling out? Or was this guy just a cold-hearted father? This one sentence kicks off our whole quest to figure out the man behind these words. Now, to solve this puzzle, we can't just guess. We have to go all the way back, reconstructing the life of Joseph Seaver one document at a time. We're going to follow the paper trail he left behind, looking for clues that can finally explain this really perplexing decision. Okay, so our first piece of evidence, it comes from the very end of his life. That will from 1753, it's not the end of our story. Nope. It's our starting point, our opening chapter. But, to really get what that will is all about, we got to understand the guy who wrote it. So the paper trail takes us back all the way from his childhood home in Roxbury to the place where he'd really make his name, Framingham. So the official records give us the basics you see here. Born, parents, siblings, the usual stuff. But honestly, for so many people from back then, his early childhood is just a blank. The real paper trail, the interesting stuff, it doesn't even start until he's a grown man, out making his own way in the world. And here it is, our first big break in the case. He's 25 years old, and Joseph packs up and leaves home for a place called Framingham. And let me tell you, this one decision, it's going to shape everything that comes next. His life, his family, his entire fortune. It all starts right here. So what's the document that marks his arrival? It's called an indenture, which is basically just a fancy word for a rental contract. For 10 shillings a year, he gets himself 75 acres of land. This is his foothold, right? His place to start. But it gives him something way more important than just land. A connection to the guy he's renting from, a man named Thomas Reed. And that connection, it really pays off. Just 3 years later, what does Joseph do? He marries his landlord's daughter, Mary. Smart move. This really cements his place in the community, and before you know it, they're starting a family. And hey, take a look at their firstborn son, Robert, born in 1702. Remember that name. He's the kid at the very center of our whole mystery. All right, so he's got a family now. Joseph's focus totally shifts. He is not content to just be a renter. All the documents we have point to a guy with serious ambition, a man who was absolutely determined to build something that would last. This timeline, which we've pieced together from a bunch of old property deeds, it really tells the story of his life's work. Look, he starts out just renting. 20 years later, boom, he's on a buying spree. And then, check out 1740. This is huge. He gifts a piece of land to his son Robert. And then finally, in 1750, he makes the big one, his crowning achievement. 100 acres. Just think about that. This was the result of over 50 years of hard work. This was a massive property. It meant security, it meant status, and it was the legacy he was planning to pass down. And here's where it all clicks together. The land deed for this huge farm links directly to his will. In the will, he calls it his homestead farm. So we know this isn't just any old piece of land. This is the main asset of his entire estate. This is the whole shebang. But, a life is more than just land and family, right? When we dig into the court and town records, we get a picture of a much more complex guy. Turns out, he had 2 very, very different sides to his personality. So who was Joseph Seaver? A respected, civic-minded guy, or kind of contentious, always getting into it with his neighbors? Well, the records seem to say he was both. On the one hand, he's serving his town and donating land. On the other, he's in court over money, and even gets in trouble for skipping church. The paper trail shows us a really complicated person. So on one side of the coin, he was totally an established member of the community. We see him on the tax rolls, he served as a constable, and he even helped set aside a massive 600-acre piece of land for everybody to use. These are definitely the actions of a stand-up citizen. But then you flip that coin over, and the court records tell a whole different story. He gets sued for debt not once, but twice. He gets cited for not attending public worship, which was a pretty big deal back then. And later in his life, he's the one doing the suing. So yeah, he was clearly not a guy who would back down from a legal fight. Okay, so now we have the context. We know the man, his family, his property, and we know he had a bit of a fiery personality. It's time. Let's go back to that will from 1753 and finally crack the case of the 5 shillings. First things first, let's look at the biggest prize, that 100-acre homestead farm. The will is crystal clear about this. It's split right down the middle. Half goes to his daughter Hannah and her husband, and the other half goes to his grandson, John Nixon. And what's really telling here is who's left out. His sons, Robert and Nathaniel, they get none of it. So what about his other daughters? Well, the will takes care of them, but not with land. Instead, they were each supposed to get cash, 40 pounds apiece. And you can see he really thought this through. It was a carefully structured plan. Hannah and his grandson John get the farm, but there's a catch. They're legally obligated to pay that cash out to the other sisters, Abigail and Elizabeth, over 6 years. Joseph was making sure everyone got something, just in different forms. And now, the big reveal, the solution to the whole puzzle. On the left, you see the will, but on the right, a land deed from 13 years before he died. It shows that Joseph had already given Robert 5 acres of really valuable meadowland. And get this, the will itself says that both Robert and his brother had already received their full portion. So the 5 shillings, it wasn't an insult at all. In wills from this time, leaving a tiny amount like that was a common legal trick. It was proof that you were intentionally cutting someone out of the main will, so they couldn't come back later and say, hey, you just forgot about me. That 5 shillings, it was basically a legal shield. So you see, by piecing together all these dry, kind of dusty old documents, a whole human story just comes to life. What looked at first like some big family drama was actually the final act of a super meticulous planner, a guy who spent his whole life building a legacy and wanted to make absolutely sure it was divided up exactly the way he wanted. Joseph Seaver's whole life was rebuilt from the paper trail he left behind. It kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? If we just look close enough at the records from our own past, what other stories are just sitting there, waiting for someone to find them?